properly. Well, hello. I am Reinier van Landschot and I'm the country lead of Volt Nederland. And Volt is a progressive pan-European political movement. And we want to bring a new energy to Europe. And that's why we decide to do things differently from time to time. And closing a day full of speeches that everybody's listened to sometimes requires some new energy as well. So I would like to ask all of you to stand up with me. Stand up, please. And we're going to bring a bit of new energy into this room. Yes, Khadija, you can stand up as well. If I look around myself, I see people that also represent, for me, the generation that made the European Union such a success over the past 60 years. So I would like to ask everyone to give the people that have created the European Union to the point where it is now, the loudest applause you have ever given anyone. So I'll put this down. Woo! Woo! Yeah! Woo! Thank you very much. You can all have a seat now. And so, I am Reinier, I'm 28 years old. I work at Albert Heijn, a supermarket company you might know. And I've spent the last 6 months, all my free time, working on Volt. And I'm actually an example of citizen involvement, and I'll share you my stories and what I've learned so far of how to involve citizens in the European democracy. But let me first start with the question. What have Europeans never done together? There's so much things we've done together, but what haven't we done? I'll answer that question in a couple of minutes. But first, I want to start with the KitKat Ruby. What is the KitKat Ruby? It's a new type of candy, and it represents for me what the European democracy citizen involvement level is based at now. Because I've been spending 6 months of all my free time in Volt, and I sent in my WhatsApp groups to my friends. Okay, I'm organizing this thing for Volt, it's a new political party, who's in? Who wants to join? And after about 1 or 2 days, somebody gave the reaction, well, I'm happy that you found something that you like to put your free time in. Nobody was enthusiastic at all. But then a good friend of mine, who works for Nestle, sent a message in the same app groups saying, I'm launching a new KitKat Ruby. Who wants to be at the launch event and eat the KitKat Ruby for the first time? And people went crazy. Yeah, me, please, can I join? Oh yes, I'll take a day off of work because I want to taste the new KitKat Ruby. And that symbolizes for me the current status we're in. But there's roughly 3 types of people involved in the democracy progress currently. First of all, the KitKat Ruby group that isn't interested at all. And then there's an awful selfie of me wearing a Volt shirt. We didn't spend 6 months creating a logo because we want to do and keep going forward, so that's why we have an awful logo. And on the right is what you get if you type in politician at Google Images. It's the first hit. So how big are these 3 groups? There's a group, 58% in 2014 didn't vote during the European Parliament elections. Of course, the active politicians group is very small. And in 2014, the group of people where I count myself in, or used to count myself in, people that are interested, always use their democratic right to vote, follow politics, but do not actively get involved. It was 62% in 1979, and it's 42% in 2014. So, what I've looked at is the average turnout rate in national elections in all the European countries over the past 30 years. And the average turnout rate is actually 75%, which goes to show for me that a quarter of the people isn't interested, will never be interested, and will stay in the KitKat Ruby group. But there's a potential of 33% moving towards the center group of actively being involved in politics in Europe, or at least in the European democracy progress. So I've noticed, talking to people and trying to get them involved in Volt, what the 4 main objections are getting involved in the European democracy progress. First of all, they say, it's too complicated and boring. It's complicated, even if I look into it, I don't understand it at all, and I find it so boring. One of my colleagues even said, looking at grass growing is more interesting. Just to show you how complicated it is, I won't get into detail on this slide, but this is all the different treaties and the different countries that are involved. I don't know them from the top of my head, I'm not sure whether anyone knows them, but it's hard.
It's about differentiated cooperation.
Differentiated cooperation, exactly. Reminds me of when I was working in a supermarket in Lelystad and I asked someone, do you want to join that night? It's voluntarily. And he asked, what is voluntarily? And I said, it is optional. And he asked, what is optional? And he said that you can choose. And I said, that you can choose to come or not. So that's why when he finally understood it. So I'm not sure whether the largest group of the KitKat Ruby group will understand differentiated cooperation.
We will work on that. Yeah.
The second reason is people don't think their contribution matters. Let me share this quote with you. It's the sad truth. When people talk about traveling to the past, they worry about radically changing the present by doing something small. But barely anyone in the present really thinks that they can radically change the future by doing something small. And that is the case. People don't think their contribution will matter. The third reason why people don't act, they don't feel any urgency. Why should I act now? And the fourth reason is actually, how does this affect me? This is a photo taken out of the window of the house where I live in Amsterdam. And right where you see this tourist with a suitcase, there used to be, until 4 weeks ago, a bench. And after a hard day of work, I would always sit in the evening sun on that bench. And when I read about the hollowing out of democracies in Hungary and Poland, then I think rationally, that's awful, but I don't feel it. But every time I go back home after a hard day's work and I pass that bench and it's gone, I'm super annoyed. And that's what really affects me. So, 4 problems why people don't contribute. What are the solutions? Firstly, we should educate people from an early age on to understand the European democracy and how it works. Secondly, we need to show people that their contribution matters. And that's also part educational, because there's so many ways to already influence the European democracy process, but nobody knows it. And people should contribute, not because it's easy, but because it's valuable. Thirdly, the local problems. European level doesn't really affect me, is what people feel. But we tend to live in a global society more and more and more. And actually, we're going towards a global society. And almost all the local problems, probably not the bench in front of my house, but other problems locally that people feel every day they pass a certain area of their environment, they are rooted in the European and even global level. So it does really affect everyone on a local level. And fourthly, why now? Well, actually, urgency can be there for 2 matters. One is an urgency out of necessity. The house is on fire and we need to put down the fire now. That's kind of how I felt after Brexit. The other one is the urgency out of opportunity. Because now we are at a vital stage in history where we can either move forward or crumble apart in European collaboration. And that opportunity window is closing down. So if we are not acting now, then nothing will happen and it might all fall apart. So, what have Europeans never done together? It's the solution that could involve those 4 things and could bring the 33% of the KitKat Ruby group to the group of actively involved citizens. Politics. Because politics has always stayed a national affair. And that's why you're not educated in it. That's why nobody knows who the European commissioners are. That's why nobody knows one of the European parties. And that's why we are failing in involving the European citizens in our democracy. Although 50% of all the regulation that affects me in my day-to-day life is already made up in Europe. So even though we have a democratic process in place, it doesn't feel democratic to me because I'm not experiencing it myself. Add to that, yes, Rutte gave a very good speech, positive, constructive towards Europe yesterday, but also he has been over the past years always blaming Europe for things he's done wrong nationally, and he's been claiming European successes as his own. And it's not just in Europe, it's in a lot of European countries. And that's because politics has remained a national affair. So now, if you look at a time frame, hundreds of years, we used to govern cities, regions, then we drew imaginary lines on a map and went to countries. And it's time for the next step. It is time to take politics to the European level, and it is time for Volt. So the name Volt doesn't stand for anything except that we want a new energy and that we needed a name that you could pronounce in 28 countries with no negative connotations at all. Which is actually pretty hard.